Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this author interaction of the 2022 NLF Reading Challenge. My name is Karthika, and I'm very excited to be here. We hope you are too. The NLF Reading Challenge is a 4-month-long reading event from March to June 2022, involving students between 10 to 13 years of age. It runs for participants on the competitive and the non-competitive tracks. We have students from across India participating in the challenge. In addition to fun, book-based activities and regular author interactions, the challenge will conclude with a quiz competition that will see the 3 best teams win gold, silver, and bronze engraved trophies respectively, certificates of achievement, and a great set of books. Before we dive into the interaction, we just wanted to let you know to please use the Q&A box to type out your questions or your responses to what's being discussed during the session. If you're a student, a teacher, or a school librarian, please mention the name of your school along with your question as well. Today, we are privileged to have with us the gifted writer, Veera Hiranandani. In addition to penning the chapter book series, Phoebe G. Green, Veera is also the author of The Whole Story of Half a Girl, which was a Sydney Taylor notable book and was a highly commended selection for the South Asia Book Award. Her next book, The Night Diary, which won the Newbery Honor, also received the 2019 Walter Dean Myers Honor Award, the 2018 Malka Penn Award for Human Rights in Literature, and several other honors and state reading list awards. Today, Veera will speak with us about her new book, How to Find What You're Not Looking For, which received the 2022 Sydney Taylor Book Award, the 2022 Jane Addams Book Award, and was a finalist for the 2022 National Jewish Book Award. Welcome, Veera. It's so nice to see you.
Thank you so much for having me back. I just have much gratitude to Neve for supporting my work over the years now. So it's really exciting to be here again and someday in person in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I'm going to do a little reading of how to find what you're not looking for. And so it's about an 11-year-old girl named Ariel, who is growing up in Connecticut in 1967. Her parents run a Jewish bakery. She's Jewish. And her older sister, who's 18, falls in love with an Indian American college student. And they want to get married. So that's kind of the setup. And the story is loosely inspired by my own parents' marriage when they decided to get married in 1968. And when I was writing this book, I was thinking about their decision and what they sort of went through when they made that decision. And my father's parents, my Indian grandparents, weren't living anymore. So my father didn't quite have that parental pressure, but my mother's parents, my grandparents, who I grew up very close to, but when she said she wanted to get married to my dad, they wanted her to marry somebody Jewish, and they weren't in favor of the marriage at first. And my father's family wasn't. They expected him to marry somebody Hindu. So it was very dramatic, and they went through it, and they were sort of pioneers in that sense. And so here I am to kind of take their inspiration and write this story, which takes place a year earlier. So this is right after the Loving versus Virginia ruling in the US, which decided that when this ruling happened in 1967, it banned all laws against interracial marriage. So I always think of my parents getting married only a year after that ruling in Connecticut, where it wasn't illegal, but if they had wanted to get married in another state before the Loving versus Virginia ruling, what would have happened? So I was kind of asking all those questions and creating a story to sort of figure out more about that time and what my parents went through. So without any more explanation, well, actually a little bit more, I'm going to read to you from a chapter called How to Eat Dinner. And the book is written in second person, so that means you. So it may take a little bit getting used to, because usually books are written in first person or third person and not as often in second person, but I'll tell you after why I decided to do this. And this is when Leah decides, after she sees a friend on the street, because she's dating Raj secretly, her fiance, or becomes her fiance, But at this point, she's dating Raj secretly. And because she sees a family friend on the street, she figures she better invite Raj over for dinner so her parents can meet him and she can kind of tell them what's going on. So here we are. How to eat dinner. When you get back home, Ma's whirling around the apartment with a rag and a bottle of Mr. Clean. Sunday is do everything else instead of working at the bakery day for Ma. Daddy opens the bakery from noon to 5 and always comes home for an early dinner. You and Leah are supposed to clean the hall bathroom, your room, and bring the laundry downstairs to the basement washers. Leah makes you do it all with her right after breakfast so she can have the afternoon to relax. Sunday's the only day she doesn't have dance, so you understand. Sunday is also the best time to ask Ma for something since she's usually distracted and impatient to get her work done. Leah doesn't waste any time. Ma, do you need any more help? She asks. Ma doesn't look up as she wipes down a cabinet. Too late for that, almost done. Leah walks over to the stove, which is empty. No pot of boiling soup on a hot day like this. She goes over to the fridge, opens it, and closes it. What are we having for dinner? She asks. You perk up from the couch, where you collapsed as you looked for the comics in the Sunday paper. Just making some egg salad, too hot for anything else, Ma says, and stops cleaning. She wipes her forehead with the back of her hand. You slump back down. Egg salad. Could I have a guest over next Sunday evening? Leah asks, not looking at Ma. She busies herself with rearranging the fruit bowl. A guest? Ma says, pushing back a bit of hair that's fallen out of her bun. Who? A boy I like. As you flip through the newspaper, pretending not to watch them, you notice that Leah calls Raj a boy now, not a man. Ma waves the green towel she's holding. Ah, so there is a boyfriend. I thought so, the way you've been going around lately, all gussied up, she says. And she grabs the orange fly swatter hanging on the doorknob and starts going after a fly buzzing around the fruit. There's nothing wrong with trying to look nice, Leah says, so can I? Ma's eyes narrow on the fly that has now landed on the top of the refrigerator. She takes a big swipe at it. These flies, they're all over as soon as the weather gets humid. So can you what? Have him over to meet you. Leah's voice shakes a little. She's had a few boyfriends come over, one Jewish boy she met at Temple Beth Torah, and one boy from school who was not Jewish. That was last year. Ma and Daddy didn't like the boy who wasn't Jewish and told her that. Ma said they didn't like him because he didn't thank them after the meal. But you don't remember the Jewish boy thanking your parents either. Honestly, your parents didn't like either of them that much. Who is this boy? Another Gentile? Ma was now suddenly wiping down the kitchen counter furiously. Ma, nobody uses that word, Leah says, and looks at you with a big question in her eyes. You shrug. What can you do? Now the fly lands on the bowl of fruit. Oh, you're a goner now. Ma lies up the swatter. He's not a Gentile, Leah tells her. Ma brings the swatter down hard on the apple. Gotcha. Then she turns her attention back to Leah. Oh, well, I guess so. That's swell. Thanks, Ma, Leah says, and hurries out of earshot before Ma can ask any more questions. So I'll give you that little sample.
Thanks so much. It's so nice that you chose to read from that chapter.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So you hear the second person point of view.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure that those in the audience who haven't yet read the book will be definitely keen to pick it up.
Great.
So we'll start off, Veera, with a few audience questions that have come in for you. So there's Srishti Nayak from grade 4B, who's got a bunch of questions for you, but I'll pick one from what she's asked you, saying, why did you make Leah run away in the story instead of her putting in the effort to convince her parents?
Yes, well, that's a really good question. And I want to answer it in a way that doesn't give too many spoilers for anybody who hasn't finished it. But, you know, I think that she feels like there is no way at that point of convincing her parents. And I think Raj also feels that way. And, there are some things that happen where she feels this urgency, and she's young, she's only 18. So she feels this urgency that she's going to lose Raj if she doesn't just sort of take matters in her own hands. So it is more of this young kind of somewhat impulsive urgency to just sort of make it real.
Okay, great. I'm sure that answered Shrishti's question. Or perhaps she has more questions now because of it. But hopefully she'll read the book and figure it out. So just shifting focus a little bit from Leah to Ariel, who from whose point of view we see the story unfolding. One of the things that really sort of strikes a reader about Ariel is the fact that she finds herself caught between a lot of things. She idolizes her sister, but also realizes that she's perceived as the second sort of not so favorite daughter, and her mother seems to like Leah more, is what Ariel thinks. She's not good and comfortable with writing on paper, and she doesn't know why until her teacher sort of helps her with that. So there's the uncertainty that comes from there. She's also, she's just caught between a lot of things. She sees that she's subjected to prejudice from her classmates, and then she sees her family sort of putting forth prejudice as well, which she finds hard to grapple with. And it's a lot for a middle schooler to process and to sort of work through. It also speaks to children's very matter-of-fact resilience, their everyday resilience that they carry with them. So how do you keep all of these multiple emotions of Ariel's top of mind when you write?
Yeah, it wasn't easy to do. And it took many, many revisions because I did want to include so many different themes in the book. And I felt like it was important because, this takes place in the US in 1967 during the Civil Rights era and during the Vietnam War and during a lot of racial protests and a time where people were becoming much more aware of these issues. And so, Ariel has never really had to kind of confront her own identity in that way. And because of everything that's happening with Leah and Raj, she's lived a pretty sheltered life, but also not in an area where there's a large Jewish community. So she's always felt sort of outside of things, but it's never felt kind of more present now in the face of all of this. But then she sees how her parents, so she's experiencing anti-Semitism from a bully at school, but she's also seeing how her parents are treating Raj, and they say it's because he's not Jewish. And that's certainly a huge part of it. But, Leah picks up on issues that it's more than that. It's because he's Indian and from a different country and has brown skin. And they know, and Leah knows that, because she is sort of kind of in the moment, in the sort of looking at the civil rights movement and what that means. So there are just so many things. And Ariel is only 11, so she is trying to take these things in a way that would be true for an 11-year-old. So I really had to put myself back into that kind of more observational place and kind of more of an innocent place. Like if you were watching all of these things happen, what would you make of it? But I do find that I can kind of go back to that sort of 11, 12-year-old place. I think that was a really present time for me when I was taking in a lot of new issues about my own mixed identity. And I also changed schools. And so I had to confront some things in a different way, but kind of at the same age. So I think it was kind of just channeling that a little bit.
Right, yeah. In fact, what you said about having to shift schools when you were younger, and you've spoken about that before. And there's a line in the book where Ariel says, feeling invisible isn't the same thing as being invisible. And it's the opposite of superpower. And you've spoken about how when you shifted schools from a small school to a larger school, it took you quite a while to find a friend. And when you did, it felt like some of the preciousness from that experience has translated into Ariel's relationship with Jane. And you also, yeah. And so you can really sense that as a reader. And also you've said, Veera, that all through high school, you didn't really find a teacher like Miss Field, but there was a teacher in your MFA program in college who really helped you. And so I thought that since we've started talking about this, maybe for the readers or for the students in the audience who feel like they haven't really found their people yet, who feel like they're not just entirely seen yet, what would you like to say to them?
Well, it gets better, and to stay true to yourself. And I think what that means is it might give you a time. It gave me a time when I switched schools and I went to a very small school where we were all like a family. There were 50 kids in the entire school, and I had been there for years, and I had never been asked the questions that when I switched schools and went to a much larger public school, I started to get asked questions about my name and how I could be sort of both these things at once, and come from both an Indian family and a Jewish family, and also I was going to a school where there were very few Jewish kids and there were no other Indian American kids in my class, and so I just felt really different, but I didn't know that really until I kind of went to the school. And so it kind of opened my eyes to the world in a different way. And I did eventually make friends, but in that year when I didn't have many friends or any friends in the beginning, I really turned to writing and I turned to reading to kind of keep me company. And so I would write in diaries and I would read books, and I kind of fell in love with the characters, and they were my friends. And that gave me something. That gave me this feeling that like I could take care of myself. And it also kind of made me fall in love with reading and writing. So you never know what those times that are more difficult or more lonely, as long as you have support around you, can kind of give you. It can give you sort of a strength as you get older. So I think that happened for me. And I did have in my MFA program at Sarah Lawrence College, where I studied fiction writing, I had many wonderful teachers there, but two that really stuck out for me. And one of them, when I was first starting, he had mentioned was writing stories, and the stories were about characters that were older than I was. They were white characters that didn't have any similar background to me. And he said, but the story that I applied with did bring up some of my identity questions and stuff. And he said, well, where are the themes in that story? And I remember feeling kind of defensive, like, well, I can write about whatever I want to write about, and I don't have to write about my own personal identity. And that's of course true. And I was experimenting with different voices. But I heard that question over time. And when I started writing longer pieces, and then I eventually wrote my first middle grade novel, I did go back to some really personal places, and I did sort of find my voice as a writer. So for me, that was ultimately kind of my muse and what fuels me still to this day. So I'm glad that he kind of brought up that question. And then I had another teacher, her name is Lucy Rosenthal, and she was just such a wonderful, encouraging voice, and she really cheered me on. And so everybody needs somebody to kind of cheer them on at some point, and so she did that for me.
That's lovely to hear. I hope it helped the readers in the audience who had similar thoughts as well.
Yeah. I hope so too.
So Veera, something that we've sort of touched upon it, how Ariel sort of comes into her own. She starts to express herself through poetry, and it comes to her quite organically. And when you were a child, you wrote poems yourself, and you posted about it on social media. So could you tell us a little bit about how is it that you came to poetry? What was it like? What does it do for you today? What did it do for you then as a child? And also speaking about Ariel finding her voice, there's an audience question from Ria, who's in 5th grade from TISP, who says, how come Ariel has such a strong voice and wants her sister Leah to marry Raj? And she has a lot of thoughts, but she's afraid to speak up to her parents.
Yeah, so these are all big questions. So for starting with poetry, I wrote a lot of different kinds of things when I was growing up. So I wrote poetry, little plays, stories. I really saw it as a way of playing and just kind of making things up. I didn't even really think about publishing or being good. I just kind of experimented and played. And so poetry was one way that I did that. And I'm glad that I had that time without thinking about kind of being good or trying to get published. I had so many years as a young person to just write because I enjoyed it. And I think that's really important for young people who like writing, to not think so much like the future or trying to get published, to just sort of practice and enjoy it, and give yourself that freedom. So I think I did that with poetry. And Ariel comes to poetry for a couple of reasons. You know, she thinks she's not a good writer, and she has a learning difference called dysgraphia, which kind of makes it hard for her to handwrite and sort of form letters. And because of that, because she's sort of focusing on the mechanics of writing so much, it's hard for her to sort of think about, you know, essay structure and paragraph structure. There's just like too much to manage at once. And when her teacher introduces poetry and also using a typewriter, it really helps her simplify it and get some of her feelings out, because she has a lot of feelings and a lot to say. And it's not so much that she's kind of so shy or like doesn't feel comfortable. She's just sort of looking for some openings and permission. And with her parents, I think she's just always been sort of kind of in their whirlwind, right? And they're really just, they're busy and they're hardworking, and like Ma just has to get things done. And that is what's kind of, you know, on her mind always, as kind of just surviving with the business and kind of making her family work and making sure there's food on the table. And so Ariel's always just been used to kind of leaving it up to them and letting them control things. And this is the first time where she really isn't sure that her parents are making the right decisions. And so this is really new as an 11-year-old. You know, what do you feel like if you're not, you know, you're not 16, where you're sort of still in that sort of separating place, or maybe feeling more comfortable kind of separating your ideas? This is very new for her. So I think that's why she's so, you know, she just doesn't know what to do first. She's just not even sure if they're right or if they're wrong first. So she has to figure that all out before she kind of has the courage to stand up to them.
Yeah, and it builds up really well because she really comes into her own. As the story progresses, I will not give away spoilers for anybody who's not read it. So Veera, we're at 6 minutes away. So let me ask you a few more questions about what's to come next. Now, so far you've done the whole story of Half a Girl, which is written in first person. You've got the Night Diary, which has one more layer of complexity, which is first person diary entries. And then you have How to Find What You're Not Looking For, which is second person. So it feels like with every book, you're sort of trying something new and you're sort of challenging yourself as a writer. So what are the other formats that you want to work with that you feel might be challenging for you as a writer? And also Kirat Singh from the audience asks, is there going to be a sequel?
Yes, well, I am glad you asked. So right now I am working on a sequel to The Night Diary, and it's been a project. It's been so much fun kind of getting back into the characters and their world and sort of following them in a post-partition world. So I was really interested in kind of exploring, you know, this idea of what happens after the crisis, what happens after you survive something that's really painful and difficult. Because often, as I did with The Night Diary, you know, we write the story of the immediate crisis and then maybe the survivor story, or possibly not, you know, somebody who doesn't survive. But I wrote kind of the survivor story, but we don't often explore, because maybe it's not as dramatic in a way, of how people rebuild their lives. And I was even thinking about the pandemic and everything that we've been through as a world, and how we're trying to figure out how to kind of rebuild our lives after everything we've been through. So kind of using that theme and exploring the family and taking a different point of view. I won't tell you yet, but it's going to be different than The Night Diary, but still about the same family. But I am approaching it a different way. I like to give myself certain boundaries that challenge me as a writer, and just experiment with new points of view and new structures. to sort of force myself to make story choices that way. Like I need those boundaries because if everything's sort of open, you can do anything you want. As a writer, you're making choices. You're saying, what time frame is this going to be? What point of view? What tense? What setting? All of these things, and then that narrows down your choices as a writer, and you have to fit your story within that, which is a good thing. It helps me. So that's what I'm doing. I hope I answered your whole question.
Yes, you did. So exciting. I'm sure Kirat is very excited that you're writing a sequel to The Night Diary. Everybody else, all the Night Diary fans out there, reason to rejoice as well. So last question for you, Veera, since we were just talking about the idea of rebuilding. In the book, when Ariel gets to a point where she writes a poem and then she stops, she thinks about it. And then she thinks that she wants to rewrite it. She substitutes a few words here and there. She shortens a few sentences. For students in the audience who are young writers, how important is rewriting, do you think, to the entire process of creating?
Rewriting is incredibly important. And I did want to specifically, I had rewritten that poem. And then I thought, maybe I'll show that process. Maybe I'll have that as part of Ariel's process where we see one poem and then the rewritten version of it, the revised version. And my editor really liked that idea. So I wanted to show that process because it is, you might have heard the phrase writing is rewriting. I think that when you're a younger writer, you don't necessarily always have to, take that story and kind of rewrite it a million times the way I do. When I'm writing a novel, I often rewrite it several times before I even give it to my editor. And then, she and I will go on a journey and also do multiple revisions. So what it begins and what it ends, there's been a lot of work in between. But for me as a young person, my rewriting sometimes came from writing something and maybe seeing that I didn't, certain things that I didn't think worked after a period of time. And so then writing something new, using that knowledge or using that skill. I wasn't always rewriting the same things over and over. Part of being young is like kind of having a million ideas and writing a million things if you love writing. So you'll eventually maybe start revising something that you really feel you want it to be, maybe more than practice. And then I suggest taking a little time away from it and then seeing it or getting a good trusted reader to read it and help you see the story in maybe a way you can't as a writer.
That is great sound advice. I'm sure all the writers in our audience are going to try at least some of the things that you've told them. Thank you so much, Veera, for doing this with us. This half hour has just it's gone by so quickly, but it's been so enriching.
Too quickly, but thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. We can't wait to see the sequel to The Night Diary. Wish you all the very best with that one.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks,
Bye.
Veera. Take care.